On a cold, rainy night in November 1940 for the forest of Morville, France, was thick with the acrid smoke of gunpowder and the heavy stench of blood. In this muddy wasteland shrouded by death, an American M4 Sherman tanks had tilted in a crater billowing black smoke. All around it, hundreds of heavily armed German infantrymen were surging forward like a massive, unstoppable great-eyed, determined to swallow this steel beast whole. Just then, an absolutely unbelievable scene unfolded as a 21-year-old black sergeant did not choose to abandon his vehicle and run for his life. Instead, he violently shoved open the top hatch, stood up against a hurricane of incoming bullets, and proudly positioned himself on the exposed roof of the tank. He grabbed the heavy .50 caliber Browning machine gun, aimed the barrel straight into that sea of death. In the battle that followed, this young man with his thick horn-rimmed glasses, who was known to be soft-spoken and gentle in his daily life, would unleash a torrent of almost unimaginable firepower. Single-handedly, he would slaughter hundreds of German soldiers, becoming the most feared Iron Man of the entire 761st Tank Battalion, and perhaps the entire European theater. What exactly did he go through in an era defined by prejudice and suspicion? How did a black armor crewman carve his immortal name into the frozen soil of a foreign land with artillery fire and blood? Today, let us open this deliberately forgotten chapter of history and step into the suffocating, legendary battlefield story of Sergeant Warren Crecy. Let us rewind the clock to 9:45 in the morning on November 10th, 1940, for on the battlefield north of Morville, muddy tank tracks crushed the dead leaves of the deep French autumn. Sergeant Warren Crecy was huddled inside his M4 Sherman, his eyes locked through the narrow vision slit at the constantly flashing muzzle blasts of German artillery ahead. He was only 21 years old, yet he was the undisputed master of this steel chariot. His unit, the 761st Tank Battalion, was an incredibly unique force. It was the very first African-American armored unit deployed to the European theater in United States Army history, proudly carrying the name the Black Panthers. His specific company was designated Dog Company. However, behind this glorious name hid an unspeakable history of humiliation and bitterness. This unit had trained grueling life for 2 full years at Camp Hood, Texas, far longer than any white tank unit twice. Because the high-ranking military brass simply did not believe that black men could handle complex, armored combat under extreme pressure. They doubted the intelligence of black soldiers, questioned their mechanical aptitude, and above all suspected they would turn and run the moment the battlefield erupted. Even 3 months after arriving in Europe, the white commanders still viewed them through a lens of deep prejudice. Just a month earlier, on October 10th, the 761st landed at Omaha Beach. There, the famously fiery General George S. Patton stood before them and delivered a deeply profound pre-battle speech. Make no mistake, these men carried the dignity of the entire black population of America on their shoulders. Black Panthers wore a patch with a simple yet ferocious motto, "Come out fighting." For Crecy and his brothers in arms, this was not just a slogan. It was their ultimate counterattack against a world steeped in discrimination. But the sheer cruelty of the battlefield quickly poured cold water on these young men eager to prove themselves. In the brutal 72 hours of intense firefights leading up to this moment, the 761st had already paid a devastating price. 24 young soldiers had closed their eyes forever, and 14 Sherman tanks had been blown into twisted piles of scrap metal. This was a slaughterhouse with zero margin for error. German anti-tank guns had already cast a massive web of death behind every tree, line, and stone wall from Morville to their next objective. Crecy knew all too well the severe disadvantages they faced. The M4 Sherman, while produced in massive numbers and highly mobile, was tragically fragile against heavy German firepower. Its frontal armor was only 51 millimeters thick, and its sides were a dangerously thin 38 millimeters. Against the terrifying German 88 millimeter anti-tank guns, this armor was essentially made of paper. A German 88 could effortlessly punch through a Sherman from 1,000 yards away, whereas the Sherman pathetic 75mm main gun required the crew to risk their lives and push within a suicidal 500 yards just to have a slight chance of penetrating a German heavy tank. Worse yet, if a Sherman gasoline engine took a hit, it was highly prone to catastrophic fiery explosions. American tankers used dark humor to cope naming their rides Ronson Lighters because the popular lighter slogan was lights every time. The Germans mockingly called them Tommy Cookers. This was the reality of Crecy battlefield, driving a steel coffin that could turn into an inferno at any second, charging directly into heavily fortified enemy death traps. The psychological pressure alone was enough to break a normal man. But Crecy, who was quiet, polite, and undeniably bookish off the battlefield, transformed into an entirely different entity the moment he sat in the commander cupola. He was a nervinguum calm, constantly relaying precise orders to his crew over the radio. Crecy Battalion started with 54 tanks, but after 3 days in hell, only 40 could still run. Their mission looked simple on the tactical manuals: push north through the woods outside Morville, support the advancing 26th Infantry Division, and clear out German positions. But the muddy reality was infinitely more complex than ink on paper. The Germans expertly used the dense forests and stone walls to establish a devastating crossfire network. Machine gun nests locked down every advance route, while anti-tank guns hid like venomous snakes in the shadows waiting to strike. At 9:50 in the morning, Crecy pushed his Sherman forward, following the lead vehicles through a gap in the trees. Corporal Terry, the driver, kept the speed at a steady 8 miles per hour, just enough to crawl through the thick mud, but slow enough to slam on the brakes if a threat appeared. The infantry followed 50 yards behind, using the massive steel hulls as rolling shields. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the woods. Ahead, at 9:53 in the morning, German machine guns roared to life. Bullets swept across the armor of the lead tanks like a violent storm, showering the mud with sparks. While these rounds couldn't pierce the tanks, they completely pinned down the American infantry. Crecy instantly locked onto the muzzle flashes 70 yards to the northeast. He violently traversed the turret and, without a second hesitation, unleashed 3 high-explosive shells in rapid succession. Following a deafening series of explosions, the German machine gun nest fell dead silent. But this was merely the prelude to the Reaper Carnival. Just 2 minutes later, at 9:55 in the morning, a monstrous crash like a giant hammer smashing down on an anvil ripped through the battlefield. Something slammed violently into the right side of Crecy tank. The sheer kinetic energy threw the 30-ton monster against the side of the turret wall. It was an armor-piercing shell. Although it didn't penetrate, the shrieking sound of tearing metal struck terror into the hearts of everyone inside. Corporal Terry, the driver, shouted the damage report. The hull was intact, the tracks were moving, but the engine temperature was spiking dangerously. Just as they prepared to adjust their position at 9:57 in the morning, a second shell arrived, howling with the laughter of death. This time it showed no mercy. The deadly armor-piercing round punched clean through the armor. In a split second, the interior of the Sherman was flooded with blinding smoke and the nauseating stench of burning propellant. The fire alarm shrieked loudly as Crecy gunners screamed in panic. The loader desperately hammered at the escape hatch, while Terry yelled from the front that the engine compartment was ablaze. This was the absolute worst nightmare for any tanker, being trapped inside a burning iron pot. Crecy's mind raced and he made the decision: every tank commander dreads but must make a abandon ship. Screaming for his men to bail out, he grabbed the edges of the commander cupola and hauled himself out of the top hatch. Just as he emerged, Crecy witnessed a sight that made his blood boil. About 40 yards away, the very German anti-tank gun that had just murdered his tanks had completely exposed. The German Artillerinnen were frantically loading their next shell, aiming directly at the second tank in the American column. At 9:58 in the morning, Crecy hit the muddy ground hard next to his burning Sherman. German machine gunners immediately spotted him, kicking up rows of deadly dirt fountains around his body. But because of the short distance and a partially obscuring stone wall, the German anti-tank crew didn't notice the American commander, who had just escaped the inferno. Crecy didn't run toward the rear, his eyes locked onto an abandoned American half-track about 30 yards to his left. Mounted right on its frame was a .30 caliber Browning M1919 19A for machine gun. Pure rage and raw survival instinct ignited the young man's blood. He took a deep breath, sprang from the mud and sprinted straight toward the half-track, running directly through scattered small arms fire. Mud splattered against his combat boots, bullets hissed past his ears, but he covered the distance in just 8 seconds. He grabbed the spade grips of the machine gun and violently swung the barrel toward the German anti-tank position. This weapon could fire for 500 rounds a minute with a lethal range of 800 yards. The Germans were a mere 40 yards away. It was a one-sided slaughter. Crecy squeezed the trigger without a shred of mercy. A dense storm of lead acted like the Reaper Sith, sweeping across the German position and instantly tearing the anti-tank crew to bloody shreds. The immediate crisis was over by 10:15 in the morning. His entire crew had evacuated the burning tanks, safely suffering only minor injuries and miraculously avoiding any fatalities. But their brothers up ahead still needed them. Crecy instantly grabbed a radio and called the battalion commander demanding a replacement Sherman from the reserve lines. At 10:40 in the morning, a fresh M4 Sherman roared into his position. It had the exact same loadout, a 75mm main gun to .30 caliber machine guns and a heavy .50 caliber mounted right on the turret roof. Without a moment hesitation, Crecy ordered his crew to mount up. By exactly 11 o'clock in the morning, they merged back into the raging river of the assault, pushing northward to help the infantry clear the German lines. The brutality of the fighting was beyond imagination. Every inch of ground was soaked in blood. The dense forest severely restricted their line of sight, with visibility dropping below 50 yards in most directions. Stone walls and farmhouses became natural fortresses for the Germans, and the rain-soaked mud severely crippled the tank's mobility. Crecy drove his new tank in a tactical wedge formation alongside for other dog company Shermans, leapfrogging to cover one another. They systematically annihilated German machine gun nests, blowing enemy strong points sky high with high explosive shells. By 2 in the afternoon, the 761st had advanced 800 yards. They had destroyed 3 machine gun nests, swiped out 2 mortar positions, and cleared 5 occupied buildings. But the toll was heavy. 2 more Shermans were badly damaged, and 11 infantrymen were dead or wounded. At 3:20 in the afternoon, a true disaster loomed. A panicked lieutenant from the 26th Infantry Division flagged down Crecy tank. A patch of high ground 400 yards ahead was completely locked down by German fire that the American infantry desperately needed armored support just to observe the enemy positions. The lieutenant believed that if even one tank could push up and draw fire, his men might survive. Crecy agreed. The lieutenant climbed onto the back of the tank to point the way. They crawled through the thick woods, fighting their way up a gentle slope. Visibility was terrible, so Terry kept the tank creeping at a painful 6 miles per hour. Crecy leaned halfway out of the hatch, scanning the perimeter like a hawk. At 3:35 in the afternoon, right as they breached the tree line near the crest, all hell broke loose. 70 yards dead ahead, German machine guns erupted. Crecy screamed for Terry to throw the tank and reverse him back into the woods. Terry wrestled the massive Sherman backward, trying to dip it into a snow-covered anti-tank ditch for cover. But the treacherous terrain betrayed them. The rear of the tank violently kicked up, and the entire 30-ton hull became hopelessly stuck at a terrifying 40-degree angle, its vulnerable underbelly completely exposed to the enemy. The engine compartment, protected by a laughable 13 millimeters of armor, was a sitting duck. A single precise shot would detonate the fuel tanks. In this desperate moment, Crecy displayed a level of ferocity that defied human logic. He didn't radio for rescue because another Sherman from Dog Company had heard the gunfire and was already moving up. The German machine guns immediately shifted their fire to these two massive targets. The American infantry behind Crecy tank were and faced down in the freezing mud by the overwhelming volume of fire. At 3:40 in the afternoon, the rescue tank arrived, braving a literal wall of flying lead. Crecy climbed out of his heavily tilted turret. The deafening sound of German bullets hammering against the steel armor rang in his ears. He sprinted through the mud to the rescue tank, grabbed a heavy, thick steel towing cable, ran all the way back through the crossfire and desperately hooked it onto the towing pintle of his paralyzed Sherman. This suicidal sprint took 90 agonizing seconds, during which he was completely naked to enemy fire. The rescue tank gunned its engine, its tracks, screaming and slipping wildly in the slick mud. At 3:42 in the afternoon, the tilted Sherman was violently yanked out of the ditch. Crecy scrambled back up the commander cupola and dropped inside. At that exact second, an armor-piercing shell slammed into the right side of the hull and bounced off. Harry tried to drive the tank back into the safety of the trees, but the Sherman was totally dead. The suspension or transmission had been utterly destroyed. During the violent extraction, the tank was paralyzed. Worse yet, the German infantry unit that had been firing on them was now shifting positions, moving to flank the exposed American infantry who were about to be slaughtered in the open. Crecy was staring down the ultimate nightmare of a tank commander: stay inside and burn to death or run out and be ripped to shreds. He looked at the pinned-down infantrymen and made an absolutely insane decision. He climbed back out of the top hatch, leaving his upper body completely exposed on the roof, and grabbed the grips of the externally mounted .50 caliber Browning heavy machine gun. This weapon was originally designed to shoot down low-flying aircraft, but right now Crecy was going to use it to kill the Reapers on the ground. Clenching his jaw, he aimed the massive killing machine at the flanking German infantry. With a lethal range of 1,800 yards and a terrifying rate of fire, he unleashed a storm of heavy lead. Firing in long, controlled bursts, he physically beat back the German assault. He kept firing until 3:55 in the afternoon, completely emptying his ammo boxes. He had saved the infantry, but his tank remained a lifeless block of steel. He needed a machine that could move at 4:18 in the afternoon. A miracle arrived. A recovery team brought him his third Sherman tank of the day, a fresh replacement, pulled from the battalion reserves. But the battle was far from over. The left flank of the American line had completely collapsed, and the German counterattack was terrifyingly brutal. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the situation spiraled out of control. German infantry launched a massive counter-assault from the northeast of Crecy ruined tank. Roughly 40 heavily armed soldiers moving in squad formations used the tree line to try and shatter the American defensive posture. Crecy had just climbed into his third tank. The main gun work the turret traversed, but the tank itself refused to move forward. Without hesitation, he spun the turret and fired the 75mm gun directly into the charging crowd. High explosive shells detonated in the trees, turning shrapnel and shattered timber into deadly projectiles, but it was not enough. The Germans kept coming. The infantry commander frantically called in artillery support, and American 105mm howitzers began raining hell on the German lines. However, when the artillery barrage lifted, a despair-inducing sight emerged. A German anti-tank team had quietly moved to an elevated position 300 yards to the east, preparing to deliver a fatal strike from above. In this life-or-death moment, Crecy 3rd tank, as if cursed by the battlefield itself, sank deep into a hidden mud pit and was completely immobilized. By 4:43 in the afternoon, the 33-ton monster was hopelessly trapped in the rotting French earth. It was a perfect and moving target. Minutes later, German machine gun fire sparked against the turret. Worse, anti-tank shells began ringing against the armor. Although they deflected, every impact sounded like the Grim Reaper knocking on the hatch. The gunner inside was screaming in sheer panic, and the loader was desperately trying to kick open the bottom escape hatch. The temperature inside the tank was rising rapidly. this steel coffin was inches away from becoming a crematorium. Meanwhile, the German assault had not stopped under the cover of falling darkness. Over 100 German infantrymen with submachine guns were swarming toward the stuck tank like bloodthirsty wolves. Crecy knew he could not wait any longer. He made the most savage, bloody, and heroic decision of his entire life. He was going to stand on the roof, take control of that heavy 50 caliber machine gun and fight these Germans to the absolute bitter end. It was his only chance at survival and the absolute last hope for the American infantry pinned down around him. It was the early morning of November 11th, 1940, for dawn did not bring a single shred of hope to this frozen French soil. Instead, wrapped in biting winds and relentless cold rain, it carried an aura of suffocating dead silence. For Sergeant Warren Crecy of the 761st Tank Battalion, the grueling hours-long hell's cape of the previous day was merely the prologue. Having survived the destruction of his vehicle, narrowly escaping death and sprinting through heavy fire on rescue missions, he now found himself plunged into an even more paralyzing nightmare. His brand new 33-ton M4 Sherman tank, while pushing north toward the village of Wu-Issei, had driven straight into a monstrous trap. That open farmland, repeatedly soaked by autumn rains and churned by the tracks of countless heavy armor, had transformed into a bottomless ocean of thick clay. The tank tracks slipped wildly in the muck, letting out a despairing roar like a dying beast. The hull began to tilt dangerously to one side until finally it was completely and helplessly swallowed by the man-eating mud. It could not move an inch. The time was 9:10 in the morning. With absolutely no cover and no path of retreat, this paralyzed Sherman was a flawless sitting target in the open mud. The air seemed to freeze, and then the roar of death swept in from all directions. German MG-40 to universal machine guns, the terrifying weapons known as Hitler Bustois, began to violently spit fire at a mind-numbing rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. A dense storm of lead poured over the Sherman armor, screeching and tearing at the metal, sending sparks flying everywhere. Even more terrifying, German artillery observers had already locked onto this massive steel target. From the distance came the blood-curdling, ripping sound of incoming shells, the deadly payload of German 88mm anti-aircraft guns. They detonated with earth-shattering force just hundreds of yards away at the tree line, blasting geysers of mud and shattered branches into the sky. Crecy and his crew faced a choice of near-certain death: either cower inside the tank and wait for a precise, armor-piercing shell to incinerate them all into ashes, or charge out into the storm of flying lead and try to dig this steel behemoth out of the muck with their bare hands. Crecy did not hesitate once again. He did the unthinkable. He violently shoved open the heavy top hatch and, risking a sniper bullet to the head, jumped straight down into the freezing knee-deep sludge. His crew followed right behind him. On this surreal and brutal morning, these young black anchors stood amidst a hurricane of bullets, using shovels and trenching tools, and even their bare hands desperately clawing at the rotting mud around the tracks, praying to create just enough clearance for a recovery vehicle to pull them free. In this tragic and desperate moment, at 9:20 in the morning, out of the corner of his eye, Crecy caught a sight that made his blood boil. To his east, on an open slope, soldiers of the U.S. Army 26th Infantry Division were attempting to charge the German lines. But it was a one-sided slaughter. The Germans, perfectly hidden behind stone walls and farmhouses, unleashed a devastating crossfire that hopelessly pinned the unarmed, the American infantry down in the open. The thick mud made moving nearly impossible. The soldiers were cut down in rows like stalks of wheat, their blood instantly dyeing the frozen French earth a deep crimson. This white infantry unit was staring down the barrel of complete annihilation in that split second. Crecy dropped his shovel. He did not cast a single glance back at his struggling tank, nor did he care about the bullets hissing right past his ears. He spun around and, like a fiercely enraged Black Panther, scrambled back up the tilted Sherman on his hands and knees. Muddy water dripped from his uniform. He did not dive back into the relative safety of the turret. Instead, he stood bolt upright, completely exposed on the roof of the tank. his hands locked in a death grip onto the 50 caliber Browning M to heavy machine gun, a weapon meant to take down airplanes. This killing machine, affectionately and furiously known by American troops as Modus weighed nearly 90 pounds. Firing massive 4-ounce, half-inch thick solid copper-jacketed rounds, it possessed terrifying kinetic energy. Its effective range was a staggering 1,800 yards. At close range, it could effortlessly shred brick walls, punch through light armor, and literally tear a human body in half. But its flaw was equally fatal. The gunner had to expose more than half of his body outside the turret, completely devoid of any armor protection. At 9:25 in the morning, Crecy slowly swung the massive barrel toward the furiously firing German lines. He took a deep breath and violently slammed down on the heavy butterfly trigger. Boom, 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 the deafening roar instantly drowned out every other sound on the battlefield. The 50 caliber machine gun howled at a terrifying rate of nearly 600 rounds per minute. Searing hot brass casings cascaded from the ejection port like a waterfall clattering against the tank's steel plating. Crecy's body shook violently from the massive recoil, but he stood like a cast iron statue, his feet nailed to the roof, his eyes as sharp as a falcon. He did not just spray blindly with icy precision, he fired long, controlled bursts, pouring those deadly half-inch rounds exactly into the German machine gun nests behind the stone walls and straight into their bunkers. Against absolute violence, all cover was rendered useless. Crecy's firepower acted like an invisible giant scythe of death, instantly leveling the German strong points within a several hundred-yard radius. The German soldiers who had just been firing maniacally were blown to pieces along with the stone walls they so proudly hid behind under the sheer concussive force of the 50 caliber rounds. The survivors of the 26th Infantry Division looked up in absolute disbelief. They saw a black sergeant wearing glasses standing atop a ruined tank like a descending god of war, single-handedly suppressing an entire German defensive line. But the Reaper was not finished. At 9:34 in the morning, a German mortar shell detonated a mere 15 yards from the tank. The massive shockwave, packed with searing shrapnel, swept in like a storm of flying razors. A jagged piece of hot steel bit viciously into Crecy's shoulder. Blood instantly soaked his uniform. The brutal impact sent him staggering, nearly throwing him off the roof, but he only let out a muffled grunt. He did not even glance at his wound. He replanted his feet, clamped his hands back down on the trigger, and continued pouring hellfire into the enemy. The barrel was glowing red hot from continuous firing, reeking of burning metal. If the temperature rose any higher, the barrel could warp or catastrophically explode, but he simply did not care. By 9:40 in the morning, the machine gun let out a hollow click. The massive ammo box was empty. Just as the Germans thought this terrifying source of fire was finally silenced and began to peek out for a counterattack, Crecy slid down the hatch into the turret with astonishing agility. Seconds later, like a deadly magician, he re-emerged carrying a crate of loose ammunition he had ripped straight from the metal belts. He quickly loaded the weapon, racked the bolt, and the roar of the machine gun or through the sky once again. Minute by agonizing minute ticked by, this one-man war had raged for nearly an hour. At 10:20 in the morning, a new threat emerged. About 500 yards to the northeast, 3 blurry silhouettes were moving rapidly along the tree line. Crecy's pupils dilated. He recognized exactly what they were. It was a German Panzer Schreck anti-tank team. Carrying their massive 88mm rocket launchers, they were scrambling for a vantage point to deliver the final death sentence to the Sherman. At this range, even a heavy machine gun could not guarantee absolute accuracy, but Crecy did not flinch. He instantly swung the gun, calculated the lead, and fired off an incredibly long burst. Hundreds of bullets carved a deadly arc through the air, showering the anti-tank team like a monsoon of lead. Seconds later, the German soldiers attempting to end Crecy's life collapsed into lifeless heaps in the mud. At 10:25 in the morning, the recovery tank finally fired up its engine. Amidst the deafening roar of the motor and the frantic squealing of steel tracks, the Sherman, that had been trapped in the mud for nearly 2 hours, was agonizingly dragged free. However, just as everyone thought they could catch their breath and finally retreat from this zone of death, the scales of the battlefield tipped violently once more. At 10:32 in the morning, an unprecedented crisis struck. Desperate to retake the position, the Germans had amassed an overwhelming force. From the shadows of the woods to the northeast of the tank, a chilling massive wave of gray uniforms suddenly surged forward. This was not a squad nor a platoon. This was an entire company of 150 to 200 elite, heavily armed German infantrymen. Rifles and submachine guns raised, they charged in a dense flooding formation, sprinting madly toward the American lines like a burst dam. American artillery support was unavailable, and the newly rescued infantrymen of the 26th Division were vastly outnumbered, their firepower completely inadequate to stop a mass charge of this scale. If this German force breached the line, every single American soldier there would be slaughtered. In this razor-edge moment, the black sergeant, his shoulder bleeding, having fought continuously for hours, reached the absolute zenith of his madness. Crecy did not call for a retreat. He did not take cover. He seemed to physically fuse with the 50 caliber heavy machine gun. He loaded the final 400 rounds left in his ammo boxes, locked the barrel dead center on the surging great tide of humanity, and waited. "Come out fighting," the motto of the 761st Tank Battalion, exploded in his heart. He clamped down on the trigger and never let go. The machine gun unleashed a continuous, horrific roar that lasted for minutes on end. At this close range, the 50 caliber rounds displayed a level of destructiveness that was purely grotesque. The German soldiers at the front of the charge did not even have time to scream before the massive kinetic energy ripped them to pieces. Rows upon rows of advancing Germans were shredded by an invisible giant hand. Blood and flesh rained down. Severed limbs tumbled into the mud. Crecy was like the Grim Reaper rising from hell. A chilling, merciless light flashed behind his glasses as he swept the barrel back and forth across the moving tide, evenly sowing death across every inch of the field. Not even the most fanatical army in the world could maintain its sanity in the face of such a literal meat grinder. Those battle-hardened German infantrymen broke. They simply could not comprehend how a mass charge of 200 men was being deadlocked in its tracks by a single American GI standing on a broken tank with one machine gun. The surviving Germans desperately scrambled for cover, then turned and fled in total panic, leaving behind a field covered in corpses and the agonizing cries of the wounded. It was not until 11:30 in the morning that the battlefield finally fell dead silent. Crecy's Sherman tank finally merged back with the armored company, continuing its advance to the north. In those few short hours of intense blood-soaked combat, this 21-year-old African-American youth had by himself destroyed at least 6 German heavy machine gun nests, repelled company-sized infantry counterattack, and wiped out multiple anti-tank squads. According to post-battle statistics, the number of German soldiers who died directly at the end of Crecy barrel reached an absolutely staggering 300. When the fighting ended and the smoke cleared, his brothers in arms looked at this young man. He was covered in mud and blood, his entire body trembling from the gun overheating and the massive recoil concussion. Everyone fell dead silent from that day on. Iron Man and the baddest man in the 761st became the lifelong glories of Warren Crecy. That very afternoon, a highly unusual battlefield promotion was swiftly approved. Sergeant Warren Crecy, through his unimaginable courage and combat record, was given a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. His commanding officers even drafted a recommendation for the nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor, right there on the spot. Yet the cruelty of history far exceeds the ruthlessness of the battlefield. In an era where racial segregation was still deeply entrenched, the doors to the highest honors remained firmly shut to African Americans. Even though Crecy had saved the lives of countless white comrades, and even though his combat record was practically a miracle in the entire history of World War II, that recommendation for the Medal of Honor vanished like a stone dropped into the sea, never to be heard of again. The reason was simple to the American military brass. At the time, awarding the nation highest honor to a black man was simply unacceptable. The 761st Tank Battalion was quietly deactivated in 1946, their glorious achievements buried deep in mountains of forgotten archives, ignored by the world. After the war, Crecy did not leave the military carrying a body full of battle scars. He continued to serve. He later stepped into the freezing mud of the Korean War, where he was severely wounded, once again narrowly escaping death. He served until 1965, retiring with the rank of major for stout by the immense physical toll of his wounds. He returned to San Francisco, spending his long, painful twilight years in hospital beds until he passed away on October 26, 1976, at the young age of 53. Ironically, it was not until 1978, 2 years after Crecy's death, that President Jimmy Carter finally signed a delayed document officially recognizing the outstanding contributions of the 761st Black Panther tank that took until 1997, 21 years after Crecy died, for the U.S. government, pressured by history to finally review the records of African-American soldiers in World War, to finally breaking the color barrier. But Warren Crecy was no longer around to see any of it. Today, as we dredge this name up from the cracks of history, what we see is not just a superhero like war legend. What we see is a soul who proved his ultimate worth with blood and life in a world overflowing with prejudice, discrimination, and injustice. On that freezing, muddy French morning in November 1940, for Warren Crecy was not just fighting the ruthless German fascists. He was declaring war on the arrogance and prejudice of an entire era. In the moment he stood atop that burning steel and pulled the trigger, he proclaimed to the entire world, courage has never had a skin color. And true heroes will forever pierce through the smoke of history, shining with immortal glory. If you want more deep dives into the forgotten heroes of World War II who defied the odds, smash that like button and subscribe. I am your battlefield historian. I will see you on the next front line.